welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American stories and recipes from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Frisia Lee. Joining me, as always, is my husband and producer, Sam.
Hello.
Joining us on this episode, I'm very excited about, we have Ellie Yang Camp, and Ellie is an artist and community educator from the San Francisco Bay Area and the proud daughter of Taiwanese immigrants. She's the author of the recently published book, Louder Than the Lies, Asian American Identity, Solidarity, and Self-Love, a primer on racism that centers the experiences of Asian Americans. It's available now. Ellie has been on other podcasts that are great, and I'm so delighted to have her here. Hi, Ellie.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're so happy. How are you?
I'm good. Actually, when I first learned about your podcast, immediately when I saw the name Worst Quality Crab, I was laughing out loud, and I was like, I'm not even sure what this podcast is about, but I want to be on it because it made me laugh
fair.
so much.
That's fair. And also, it is a Deep Cut Joy Luck Club reference.
Yes, which I got. That's why I got it instantly. I was like, okay, good. These are my people. I need to talk to these people.
Because sometimes a couple of people have been like, oh my God, your name is great. And I'm like, oh, you get it? And they're like, no. And I was like,
no, I will quote that line from the movie from time to time.
Oh, thank you.
You know, just, as a cheesy joke, but, I will quote that line sometimes.
Oh, see. Oh, this is meant to be then. Thank you so much, Ellie. You're our people. This is amazing. Before we get into the dish, let's just say that, this is a weird time. It's post-election. Your book was pre-election.
Yes, just barely.
Yeah, just barely, but still. Not that it changes that much about current reality, but I think that makes this work all that more important.
Mm-hmm.
And I promise we will talk about food. But I'm just saying this because I've been reading it. I haven't finished it. And so for listeners, it's Louder Than the Lies. It's really great. It makes a lot of things very clear and digestible that seemed like things that I had always felt but couldn't really name or, articulate succinctly. And I'm sure we will talk about things related to it as we get into our conversation.
Yeah.
But this is just my pre-show plug for your book because I'm really enjoying it. And I promise that we will not ask you hard race questions on this show. But I will ask you, what dish or dishes did you want to talk about today? And who was making them? Where were you eating them? All of the things.
So the dish I immediately thought about was Taiwanese beef noodle soup because it's something my dad makes. I just, usually if I go visit them and they're just hanging around at home, oftentimes he will have a pot on the stove because he's making the broth. And so he will my dad's the type of dad that is in his office, watching, I don't know, Taiwanese news or whatever media on his computer. And he will scurry out once in a while and taste the broth and put whatever ingredients in to make it taste better. And then go back to his office to let it boil longer and then come in. He's constantly tasting and perfecting this broth. So, that's what I thought about immediately. But actually, it was funny because as I was trying to think about it, I realized that, Taiwanese beef noodle soup, I'm just oh, and it's so Taiwanese. But then I was like, that's my dad. But then if I think about my mom, it's also a different soup. So she is often making some sort of, we just call it chicken broth, but it's just a chicken broth that often has maybe some of those typical Chinese herbs like goji berries or ginseng or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just these broths. And so I'm realizing even just talking about it, why I love soup so much because my parents are constantly making these delicious soups at home. And so it's just my favorite.
That's interesting because I feel like that is weirdly intimidating for me. When you said that, I was like, maybe I'm not a soup person because no one in my family really makes soup that much because it takes forever.
It does. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you ask me, I'm like, do I have a recipe? I actually don't have a recipe. And I've tried to make the chicken broth I can do. But the beef noodle soup, I'm I've tried to make it a couple times and I think it's passable. But I'm I still haven't quite perfected it, right? There's still something missing. And I think it's really just that it just takes so much time that I'm like, I don't have time to be sitting around all day, tending to this broth. But
well, maybe you have to like do it while you're working. Scurry out, go back to work, scurry out again,
right?
Go back and work on some other stuff. Has your dad always been making this for you?
My parents are both immigrants. So when I was younger, he did make it, but not as often because he was just busy working, But I do remember like the first time I visited Taiwan, we went to some place. I was probably like 7 or 8. And it was like my first bowl of like legit Taiwanese noodle soup from Taiwan. And I still remember it. It was just like so delicious. And it had like these thick hand-pulled noodles. And it was just so good. And it was kind of like this hole in the wall type of place where that's all they served. This is my 7-year-old memory, so I don't know how accurate it is.
Oh, no, it's
like,
perfect.
From what I remember, it was like you could either get like the non-spicy bowl or the spicy bowl. Like that was it. And so that was the choice. And like, being a kid, I was like, I want the non-spicy one. And I just remember it was just like so good. And I think the rest of my life, I've been like chasing that bowl, right? And so I've also learned since that there's actually 2 types of Taiwanese beef noodle soup, like in terms of the broth. So there's like one type, which I think is more typical and it's easier to find in the United States where the broth is darker. It's a little bit more soy sauce heavy. And then there's a version that it's like a lighter broth where it's clearer. And and it's not as common. And I think it's because it takes a lot more time and effort to like impart flavor into the broth because you're not relying on like so much soy sauce. But that's the kind that I like. And that's the kind that my dad makes. So I'm like, no wonder. So I've always thought that I was just like this ultimate like Taiwanese beef noodle soup snob where I'm like, oh, none of the restaurants in the United States. That's not what I'm looking for. But after a while, I'm like, oh, I think there's actually 2 different types. I mean, and the type that I'm looking for is not as common.
Yeah, both can be true.
Yes, both can be true.
Not that it's a bad thing to be the ultimate snob about something. If that is like the childhood memory that you're chasing.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of love that actually. Wow. Okay. So he's still making it for you today. You're making it sort of, but not exactly the same.
Yeah. Now that we have things like TikTok and the internet, it's been really helpful to see other people that know how to make it, and see what they do and what ingredients. Also, I would say, I mean, my parents, both of them are not like the best at explaining things.
I was just going to ask.
So it's like if you're like, ask them like, well, how do you make it? They'll kind of give you these like jumbled answers. And it's like, I don't understand. Or it's like even the recipe, there's no like recipe, right? It's like you just like put the ingredients in and then like over a series of hours you go in and you taste and you're constantly adding, right? And it's just like, it's not that simple. So it's been nice to have like it on the internet and be like, oh, okay, this is the exact ingredient. Oh, that's what my dad was using. Like I couldn't read the labels or, I didn't really know what it was. I'm like, oh, is that what it is? So
does that mean he's just working from like straight memory and flavor every time he makes it?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you think he learned to make this?
That's a good question. I don't know. I never asked him.
Oh.
Huh.
Will you? I mean, not for the show, but like...
My guess, well, I should ask him, but my guess is he figured it out over time. I feel like it's something he's been perfecting. I mean, he probably learned, from other Taiwanese people at some point, or observed. And I think he knew like the base ingredients, but I do think being an immigrant, he immigrated in the late 60s and just like not having a lot available around you, And so I think he kind of tried to figure it out himself through process from like trial and error. A lot of trial and error. Yeah.
He's also chasing a taste memory.
Oh, probably. Most certainly. I'm like, I have such strong cravings right now. I'm like, I could taste the broth in my mouth.
Yeah, the problem with the show is sometimes we do it too early and no one's eaten, or we just, the thing is too good and you just crave it and need to have it. So text your dad after this and say like, I'm coming over, get it ready. Or maybe it's already in the way. You talked about your mom, right? And
Yeah.
hers is, has she ever made the beef noodle soup, first of all, do you think?
Oh, gosh. Probably not.
Oh,
Not that I remember.
okay.
It's like very distinct. Dad is beef noodle soup. Mom is chicken broth. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
that it's like the embodiment of my parents to me in these two soups.
Well,
I feel like there's more to that.
And one to me, because of one is my mom and one is my dad, like one is more masculine to me and one is more feminine.
Mm.
So like the chicken, we could talk about the chicken broth now. So the chicken broth now is like it's like very like a daily thing. Like it's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like if you're sick, like my mom will be like, "Can I make you some chicken broth?" Actually, with my book launch, because my mom was seeing how busy I was, right? And then trying to juggle a lot of stuff, talking about things like racism, right? Which is very taxing. And so she was just like, "Do you want me to bring you some chicken broth?" And I was like, "Actually, that would be awesome." And so she like brought me some chicken broth that she like put all this like really fancy stuff in it too. Cause I was like, "Oh wow, this was a pot of love from my mom." She had like the different herbs. I think she got some abalone. I was like, "Whoa, this
Oh.
is fancy."
yummy.
But yeah, it was like her trying to like strengthen me in this very cultural way, which I was happy to accept.
What part of the chicken does she use, or does she use like a whole chicken?
Yeah, we'll use like a whole chicken. So, you know, you need the bones. When I make it, because I'm too lazy to use a whole chicken, I'll use like the whole, you know, like the whole leg quarter. I'll try to find a leg quarter because I like thigh meat the best.
As you should.
But, you know, it has to have the bones. Or if it's, you know, like when I was a student, you know, it's just like drumsticks or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But obviously, the more bones you have, the better the flavor of the broth. But yeah, you get a whole chicken and you plop it in a bunch of water and you put in the salt and like, you know, whatever else you want. Garlic, mushrooms, whatever.
I'm sure the answer to this is no, but like, let me just play this out. Your mom's using whole chicken. She's making broth basically daily, or she's having broth basically daily.
Mm-hmm.
Is she using whole chicken every day?
Sometimes. Well, so it's like she will, maybe every day is an overstatement.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was at least once a
Well,
week.
because Sam's mom makes a soup almost every day.
Okay. Now she'll use an Instant Pot, though, which makes it so easy,
Okay.
right? Or we have like a tatung rice cooker. Are you guys familiar with the tatung rice cookers? So like they're kind of like these steamers. So I know beforehand she used to make it in that. So it's not like she's like watching it actively on the stove all the time.
Okay.
And I remember when I was younger, you know, she would use a crock pot kind of thing. So she would go to work and leave the crock pot on. And then I remember after school, I was supposed to come home and check the crock pot to make sure it was cooking properly. And then I remember I didn't really know what to do. So she'd be like, "Is it working?" And I'm like, "I guess. I have no idea what you asked me to do."
Like, it's not raw anymore.
Yeah.
So,
It
yes.
smells okay.
When you were growing up, it sounds like both your parents were working a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Who was doing most of the cooking, or were they sort of split? What was that like for you?
It was split a little bit. I would say it was more my mom for sure. I think in terms of gender roles, it felt like my mom was more responsible for like the day to day. And then if she was not available, then my dad would fill in. And my dad had like these specific dishes that he could make or that he did make. And it was like, you know, he would make those over and over. And they were all really yummy. But my mom is the one that, like when we talk about like feeding a family or feeding children or that people have to eat 3 times a day kind of thing, I feel like she was the one that was thinking about those things, you know?
What were some of the things that she was feeding you and your dad's sort of go-tos?
Okay, so for my mom, it was just an array of stuff. My mom is definitely a more adventurous eater as well. So she was really open to like learning how to cook different types of American foods, you know, like spaghetti. I have an older brother, so I'm the youngest. I have one older brother. He was also kind of a picky eater. So I remember when I was really young, a lot of it just revolved around what does he want to eat? Like, what is he willing to eat? No, there's
Same.
I don't know what you call it, but there's like I learned later on it's actually a Japanese dish, but it's like a fried rice, but it has like a tomato-y ketchup flavor mixed into it. I remember that was kind of showed up a lot when I was like really young, like elementary school. But yeah, like I remember my mom would go through these phases where she would like learn about a new dish. There was one phase where there was like a seafood pasta that she was just like all about this seafood pasta. And she would make this seafood pasta whenever she could.
Were you into the seafood pasta or were you like suffering through?
It was fine, but I think the amount of time she wanted to have the seafood pasta, I was like, oh, okay, this is a lot.
Oh, yes. I
remember sometimes like my parents would have like parties in our house from time to time, usually like with Taiwanese community members.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do remember my mom always making like this really big pot of it's like a Taiwanese soup called baki. I haven't had it in a long time. It's very Taiwanese, but it had like fish balls and bamboo shoots and I don't even know what was in there. like Napa cabbage, it was just like it was like a stew.
Yeah.
So like she did a lot of that type of cooking.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, sometimes they would just take out.
Nice. What were your dad's like handful of go-tos when he had to pinch hit?
But he was really into frying chicken wings.
Oh.
Which was delicious. He actually had 2 chicken wing recipes. One was just like fried chicken wings, and the other one was like, he called it oyster chicken, but it was basically chicken wings and like an oyster sauce.
Mm-hmm.
But he would do the whole thing where, you would slice the green onions on top to like make sure there was, like I don't know, some sort of aromatic or whatever on top of it. So like I kind of remember more when I was maybe in middle school because my mom was working later, but my dad, he had a very like 9 to 5 job. Mm-hmm. And so like he would get home first. And then if my mom was working later, then, cooking like oyster chicken or something like that would have been pretty standard for him. He's not as an adventurous eater in terms of different cultures. So he's the one that is, I think he is trying to like bring back these like Taiwanese flavors more so, or like what you said, like chasing those childhood memories.
Yeah.
That does sound like my dad. Or actually what my kids really love, or one of my kids really loves that he makes now is it's basically like tripe.
Oh.
What do you call it? Like the 100 pages. It's a certain type of tripe that's like sliced real thin, but it's like kind of in this chili-ish oil sauce. But one of my kids loves it. And so he will make it for her.
How old are your kids?
My kids, I have a middle schooler and a high schooler.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. So my dad will do some of those more traditional Taiwanese, like chicken gizzards is another one that he will do.
Oh.
That my kid actually likes too. She's actually a picky eater, but she loves the Asian stuff.
Huh.
Yum. Nice.
I feel like even when our kids are that old, that's still going to be a hard pass on their part for our kids. I don't know.
It's kind of amazing that she likes those things because she's otherwise kind of picky also.
I mean, good for her. As an adult, I'm still like, I'm 50-50 on tripe. Depends on where it is and, which restaurant. So good. Good for that picky eater.
Yeah.
Everybody needs their thing. You grew up in the Bay Area, correct?
Yes. I grew up in like South San Jose.
Okay.
In Almaden.
Okay. So, San Jose is a largely Asian population.
Yes. Where I lived in like South San Jose and Almaden, it was, I did grow up around other Asians, but we were still a minority.
I was going to say it's largely Asian, but like more so recently and also
yes,
not everywhere. What was that like for you?
I think when I graduated high school, my school was probably like around 25 to 30% Asian. And then we had maybe like 15 to 20% Hispanic, and then everybody else was white.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a little bit more of a more affluent part of San Jose. So it's like really boring is what it is. There's not a lot going on, and you have to drive everywhere. And we were like 20 minutes from the closest freeway.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
There really wasn't a lot going on. And my parents that are immigrants both worked. So just growing up, I spent a lot of time at home. I spent a lot of time watching TV. I watched so much TV. Mm-hmm. I still love watching TV.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. But, I had Asian friends. Most of them were also children of immigrants. And a lot of us are still really good friends. But I would say we didn't do a lot of stuff.
That's fair.
It just wasn't a very interesting place. There were things to do. Maybe we would watch a movie or something.
Yeah. No, that's fair. What I actually wanted to talk about or ask about is like the Taiwanese component, because I think when we think
Okay.
about San Jose now, it's largely like Vietnamese population and more so like South Asian.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'll be honest, I don't think I probably knew Taiwanese people when I was a kid, but I didn't know that I knew Taiwanese people, if you know what I mean. Like, because they weren't like, well, one, we were dumb kids, so no one was out here being like, this thing about me, this cultural thing. But I feel like, it wasn't even until I was probably in my early 20s that I started to like understand the distinction about Taiwanese culture and food and sort of like not claiming, but just like that as the distinct representation point. Because I grew up in, I went to like a Chinese immersion school and everything was just sort of like Chinese, Cantonese, very kind of in its own way sheltered, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my question is just, what was it like for you kind of navigating Taiwanese immigrants' parents specifically, feeling connected to Taiwanese culture in a place that like maybe outwardly wasn't that predominant, but you found an enclave, or I don't know, like you tell me.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Taiwanese church. So I think that was probably the biggest connection or the biggest anchor to Taiwanese identity. But yeah, I'm trying to think, like my friends at school rarely identified as Taiwanese. So I grew up in the 80s. Also, things have kind of...
So did we.
Yes, great. So things have kind of changed/evolved since then. But I would say growing up in the 80s as a Taiwanese person, and then like the identity was very much about like, if your family came through Taiwan, there were basically like two types of people, right? They were like ethnic Chinese people that maybe came through China in like 1949. And then Taiwan was just kind of like an escape place for them after the Chinese Civil War. And then eventually they immigrated to the United States. So that was one group of people. And they rarely identified as Taiwanese. They would just identify as Chinese.
And I think that's what I like, even into my like early 20s. Like that was my weird perception because of in my AP government class when I was 17.
And so like families like mine have actually been in Taiwan since we're also Han. So I guess we would call ourselves Han Taiwanese at this point. But my family's been in Taiwan since the 1600s. And so in Taiwan at the time, after the Chinese nationalists took over, we're getting into a bunch of history stuff now.
No, I know. Sorry.
Right. It's okay. This is actually what I usually talk about. So.
I was going to say, I feel like this is your usual thing. And also it's important and there's a reason.
Serious?
No. This is important.
But so like families like mine were treated as second-class citizens, right? So, and then my parents immigrated, but very much part of their identity was like, we are not Chinese, we are Taiwanese. And so I was raised like never identifying as Chinese. We were always Taiwanese. And so same with the Taiwanese church that I grew up in. It's like we were all Taiwanese, but not that I wouldn't befriend people, right? But it was just like, it was just very clear to us that there was a distinction, and it was really important in terms of the way we were raised. And so actually, it's an interesting question about me and my Taiwanese identity, because I do feel like I spent a lot of my childhood trying to figure out, is this Chinese or Taiwanese? Is this Chinese or Taiwanese? Because at least at home, I knew that there were different languages, because at home, my parents spoke mostly Taiwanese and English, and then sometimes Mandarin, but it was clear that they were fluent in both. I was raised in a way where it was like, well, Mandarin is like the colonizer's language, but Taiwanese is our family language, right? But at the same time, Mandarin is exceptionally useful to know, right? And so, like, I mean, I'm not fluent in either language in any way. Like, I kind of failed at both languages. But I think I did kind of have this ongoing, like, internal tension about, like, is this Taiwanese or Chinese? Because I need to learn the Taiwanese stuff, but not the Chinese stuff. And then getting older now, I kind of realized, they're not really so easy to separate out anymore. You know, it's like, it all kind of influences each other. And so this, like, kind of purity kind of aspect to it that I think I was raised in a little bit is not really something that it's not going to take you into the future so much, like you can have pride and things like that. But at the same time, also what it means to be Taiwanese, both from people in Taiwan and then people identifying as Taiwanese American has evolved a lot since then. So like back in the 80s, I have friends that would have only identified as Chinese American, but their families came through Taiwan. Now they're kind of learning more about their histories and wanting to find roots. And they're like, actually, I feel more connection to Taiwan. Is it okay to call myself Taiwanese? And then Taiwan as a country, we're kind of like, anybody that wants to claim us and like, say that we exist and that we have an identity, it's like, sure, like, yeah, the more Taiwanese people that exist, the better kind of thing. So even just that identity has like evolved a lot. But I think that required me to kind of expand my idea of what it meant to be Taiwanese compared to what I was like taught and given as like a child. And also I was a child, so it's very possible I was putting a lot of like absolutes and bounds on an idea in my like child brain that maybe didn't really exist. But to me, that's what it was. So
Why do you think that was important to you to make that distinction when you were a child? Was it just something your parents kind of modeled and you wanted to be a part of that, or?
I mean, I grew up in an atmosphere where Taiwanese people were exceptionally proud to be Taiwanese, both culturally and politically. It was both at home through my parents, and then also in my church. So it's like, I remember our Taiwanese church, at some point there were 2 branches of that church, and we were in the branch that was in San Jose, but there was like a bigger church that was in Mountain View. And they were kind of like, well, how do we grow the church? Maybe we should start having our services in Mandarin instead of Taiwanese language because it would attract more people. And then there was this whole debate, maybe even division between the Taiwanese people that were like, no, like we are not giving up our language. Like this is why we're here. Like, it's like they're always trying to erase us, right? And so I actually think the church might have split over that. Like, I think the branch that I was at, they decided to keep the Taiwanese language services. And then the other one agreed to kind of expand it to more Mandarin speaking. And I don't want to say that one is right and one is wrong. I think they're just 2 ways to go. But I'm just saying this was the atmosphere that I grew up in, where it was like, it was very much about self-preservation, maybe, but survival, but also a lot of pride. Like, why should we have to always erase ourselves? Like we get to define who we are, even if we're a small number, right? We know who we are, and we're not going to keep bending over backwards trying to accommodate other people because they think we're annoying or stubborn or things like that. Which I think actually, like, leading to the book I wrote, I think people ask me sometimes, it's like, how did you learn to be so proud to be Asian American and this like self-determination and stuff? I'm like, well, that's kind of how I grew up being Taiwanese. It's like I'm used to people thinking that I'm annoying and stubborn. And, I'm used to being like, oh, you might think that I'm something, but I know that I'm something else. Or like, I know who I am. And if other people get it or not, that still has no bearing on how I think about myself kind of thing. And so I do think it kind of helped me have that certain stubbornness or maybe self-confidence in terms of identity in that way.
That's awesome. I was actually going to ask you that, but actually that reminds me of something that you wrote in the book about this work. I think it was more around the conversation of like having conversations about race are difficult and require stamina.
Yes.
And I think that like that stuck out for me so much of like, oh yes, this is not like a one-time conversation and like when you're done, you just opt out. Like it does require so much stamina. And I think you just name that in your own upbringing of like, well, we just keep on doing it.
Yeah. Stamina and practice, right? It's like, it's not like even me having these conversations with you and like around my book, it's not like I just came out of this free form, already formed, confident, talking about these things. Sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I'm saying these things out loud. Like, when did I learn to talk about these things? Like, I'm learning as I go kind of thing. But it's been like this constant step by step by step. It's like and then it's also nice to be surrounded by other people that feel similarly.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, yeah, we know who we are, right? It's like, we're just being honest about who we are.
Oh man. That's it. End of show. We're just being honest about who we are. That's all we want to do. No, just kidding. So much more show. How are you imparting Taiwanese culture to your kids?
It's hard. I think most of it is through food. Some exposure to like my parents. And, you know, there's this whole thing. So it's like growing up within the church, it was this like really weird combination of, you know, we're really proud to be Taiwanese. We speak the language. We politically identify with this very Taiwanese type of identity, Taiwanese American. But then growing up at the church, we were also told like, oh, but like, you know, any sort of these like certain cultural practices, maybe surrounding holidays or things like that. It's like, those are all, you know, of the devil, right? It's like you have to like kind of erase some of those because they're not like Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my adulthood, I do think me reclaiming some of those roots is being like, oh, you know, it's like we celebrated like Lunar New Year a little bit, but not like really when I was growing up. And also we didn't really have extended family around us. So like I think the church was our extended family.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, no, we're actually going to get together every year for Lunar New Year. Like I didn't get red envelopes as a kid. I don't know if it was like it's not Christian, or maybe my dad is just kind of cheap in that way. He's like, I don't want to do that. Why do I gotta do that? But it's like, oh, like, so as an aunt, I'm like, oh, I should give red envelopes to my nieces and nephews, right? It's kind of just like bringing in some of those cultural practices. Or even, what is it, like the Mid-Autumn Festival, like the Moon Festival. I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, like, can we celebrate that even if it's in a minor way? Like, I'm going to go to Ranch 99 and I am going to buy some mooncakes and we will just eat them, right? And it's like, look, we celebrated it. Or like, we'll walk around and try to see if we could see the moon. I feel like it's always cloudy.
Oh, no, it definitely is. Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, we can't ever see the moon. But I was like, but just to like recognize some of those things. You know, but yeah, I do think it's difficult. Something I wish I was able to hang on to more is the language. It's really hard. And I kind of knew as a mother already, I was like, I don't think my kids are going to learn because I was barely able to learn. And I'm like, if I couldn't do it, like, how am I supposed to teach them? And then even when they were little, I would try to, like, I would take them to my parents' house and I'd be like, can you please speak Taiwanese with them? But then they end up just defaulting to English, which is basically what they did with me and my brother. And I'm just like, you know what? It is what it is, you know? So, but I think even just like saying like, we're Taiwanese, we love being Taiwanese, you know, even just like hearing words like that makes them think, oh, it's like a good thing. And yes, we are this thing, you know, and we can explore for ourselves. And when they get older, they can explore for themselves what it means to them.
That's so interesting. Sam, question for you. Growing up, did you ever hear like, we're Chinese, we're so proud to be Chinese?
Not in those words, but definitely if we were like watching the Olympics or something.
Oh.
My parents would be like, go China. So, you know, not
but also
specifically.
Your parents are from like colonial days Hong Kong, right? Like technically.
Yeah, true. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like,
I mean, no one's rooting for England.
Exactly.
I guess I ask because like both being mixed and whatever generation, this attachment and pride to something is very interesting to me. And it's not something that like I grew up with. And I sort of just wonder like what that experience is like, A, but B, like, oh, how affirming. How nice. Like it must be nice to feel part of a community, I guess is where I'm going. It's just my therapy session at this point. Well, in that to like, you know, if I'm going to bring it back to your book too, I think that there is something there around like the ways in which we are part of community or can be part of community that is affirming and says like, this thing is important to me and to my identity. And as such, I am not going to take some shit from other people.
Yeah.
And then to sort of coalition build around that too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting what you just said, because it's like, I think people, including myself, I'll say things like, oh, yes, I grew up around this community, or I love this community. I'm so proud of this community. But it doesn't mean that I constantly feel accepted or like I belong, it's like there's always like edges to it where it's like, oh yeah, I got criticized again, or oh, they told me to stop, or and it gets frustrating sometimes. And so it's not like it's just pure all the time
Sure,
joy,
right? Yes. Thank
You're
you for
also
that.
dealing with a lot of trauma responses, intergenerational conflict, cross-cultural, miscommunication. So there is a lot of it, but I think I've learned to just kind of take a step back and be like, you know what? This is just what it is. This is what it means to be us, right? And like, if I'm going to love myself, I'm like, I love myself, so I love us, right? And so it's all part of it, right? Or even if you just think about your own self, it's like, obviously, none of us are perfect people. We all do stupid things all the time and make a lot of mistakes, but it still doesn't mean I can't like love myself and be proud of myself and, have a strong sense of who I am. So I kind of extend some of that feeling towards community, Asian American community in general.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Ellie, how did you come to write this book? It's not a food question at all. I just want to know.
It's not a food question. I feel like there's those are two questions. So it's like, how did I get the opportunity to write the book, or how did I actually go about writing the book?
I guess neither.
Okay.
I guess my real question is like, how did you get into this work that led to this book?
Oh, okay. So, being an author and writing a book is not something I expected that I was ever going to do. Basically, I was a public high school teacher for about 10 years in San Jose, and then I left the classroom and I raised my kids. But I'm kind of, I would say I'm still a stay-at-home parent. And I'm like that friend that used to be a teacher that now stays at home but can't shut up about white supremacy. Like, I'm that lady, right?
Love it.
And so I started making these like curriculum materials about being Asian American and basically about like American racism from an Asian American perspective, because I used to be like a history teacher, like a U.S. history teacher. And so I've always been drawn to things like Black history, the history of race in the United States, because I think if you have an honest exploration of American history, you can't help but notice it. And then as a person of color, I'm like, wait, what is this? Because this is important to me, right? And then I felt like a lot of times it was really hard to find resources that talked about Asian American perspectives. I mean, there's Asian American history, but sometimes I felt like I had questions about race.
Right.
And so I think a lot of my initial learnings were actually through Black history, where when you learn about Black history, you can't help but learn about race because there are actually very specific laws about like what was allowed, what wasn't allowed, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to Asian American history, it's kind of more in the middle and more nebulous. And so I always just wish there was more information out there for people to learn, and then like stuff that I wish I had growing up that would have helped make things make more sense to me. And so I just started making random curriculum materials. Sometimes I would be like teaching a workshop or like whatever. I put them on a website eventually, because it's just like the teacher in me, where it's like I can't help but make learning materials. I'm like, I think this is just what I do as a creative outlet. And then eventually I started sharing some online kind of in 2020. And actually the timing of it was just pure coincidence, honestly. I remember my goal for 2019 was to get my website actually going public. And I think I finally got it up like the end of December 2019. And I was like, I did it. And I just wanted there to be more materials for other educators, for other learners, like anti-racist stuff that like centered Asian American experiences. And then, 2020 happened. And then I was like, oh my gosh. And I started sharing a couple things online. And then my book agent saw some stuff and approached me and was like, you should write a book. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do that. Like, I'm just a lady that like does this stuff from home, right? But
books get written at home,
right? And so I was like, I'm like, this is not a normal opportunity that people get. So I was like, I might as well try, right? So it took like 4 years. So, but it's out now, which is kind of incredible to me. It's like a real book.
It's a real book. I've seen it in multiple bookstores.
Oh, awesome.
It's great.
Yay.
Yeah. I was going to try to buy it on Waverly, Hi, on Waverly. We love you.
Yes, we love On Waverly.
But I couldn't make it to Chinatown in time, so I got it at my local Green Apple.
Oh, yay. We love Green Apple too.
We love Green. Yeah, we love you too. When I have to, not have to, but when I get to buy a book from someone I know or I'm going to know, I try not to get it on Amazon. That's my gift to everyone.
Yes.
Buy it locally.
Yes.
The book is really great. I want to talk about food, and also I want to talk about only the book because there are so many things, including what I think is a Princess Bride reference.
Oh, yes, there is a Princess Bride reference there.
Got it.
Which is not like super intentional. It's more like, I need to call this something. And this is what I came up with. Because guess what? I grew up in the 80s and like the quotes for Princess Bride are always cycling through my brain.
Yes. No, I read it and I was like, I think I know what this is. That's a little Easter egg for you, listeners. Read the book, find the Princess Bride quote. How did your immigrant parents receive this book?
Oh, this is a good question. So, there was the before the book was done, and then there was after the book was done. Okay, so my parents knew I was writing a book, and they knew I was under a lot of stress because they would ask questions about it, and I would just spontaneously start yelling because I was just like, stop it, right? And they're like, okay, leave her alone. But also part of it was like, with 2020, all the protests, George Floyd, all that kind of stuff. My mom started asking for the first time. She was like, because she knew I was really passionate about this stuff. And I think before this, there was always some hesitation on their part because I don't think they really understood why it was so important to me because they thought this is kind of risky. Right? Mm-hmm. As immigrants, they were like, we've spent your whole life trying to build you a safe life, And it's like, why would you risk for this, like where you're talking about not being racist against Black people or brown people. It's like that kind of thing. And so it's like, I knew where they were coming from in terms of, yes, obviously they've absorbed a lot of white supremacist indoctrination through, American Dream and all that kind of stuff. And the job is to move ourselves into more proximity with whiteness, all that kind of stuff, right? And all the stereotypes about like, Black and brown people being unsafe and dangerous, all that kind of stuff. So I knew why they were saying these things, but at the same time, they were not helpful for me to hear while I was trying to write the book. Okay.
Right.
So my mom was showing some curiosity. But at the same time, I was like, I am working on this book and it is so hard. I do not have time to be talking to you about racism and working on this book. And I also knew that if I was actually able to achieve what I wanted in the book, like the book was partially for her or people like her that are like, they just need a good, I wouldn't even say it's introductory, but it is very welcoming and could be introductory in a way that is very caring and hopefully easy to understand, right?
Yes.
So I was keeping her in mind when I was writing and creating this tool. Okay, so I didn't show them the book at all until it was absolutely done. They saw a finished version. They did not ever see a draft or anything like that. Part of it was because I knew that I might only get one shot, right? And I want them to see the finished version, the best version. So the book came out and my mom read it. It took about 2 weeks. And I say this as someone who is fluent in English, but also is not someone that reads print a lot. She'll listen to audiobooks, but not print. But I'm like, oh, Mom, it only took you 2 weeks. Awesome, right? That means that's telling me that like it's kind of easy to read. But she texted me and she was like, I finished it. She's like, I feel so liberated. And I was like, what?
Oh.
Like I was not expecting to hear it at all. And then she kind of gushed a little. She's like, I feel like I was in high school again. Like somebody was like teaching me. Aww. And I was like, it warmed my heart so much, but it like also made me like think about like, oh, like this is my mom. She's in, let's see, I think she's in her 70s right now. She's in her mid 70s. But it's like, yeah, like her whole American story has been like, she came as a grad school student, but it's like, I'm just wondering, when's the last time someone spoke patiently to my mom about something that is gonna hopefully like help her feel freer in a kind, gentle way that's actually, she's gonna feel like she learned something and her and life made more sense to her. And I'm like, that I feel like maybe that experience can be so rare for a lot of us, but especially like immigrants, right? Where they're just like working hard all the time. So they've really responded to it well. And then actually at one of my book launches, it was like my hometown book launch, my parents were there. And my friend told me afterwards that they had talked to my mom, and my mom told them that she was just like, like, don't give up on us, like older generations. It's like, we still want to learn, right? We still want to understand. But she's like, so don't give up on us. And I was like, oh, what a sweet thing to say, Mom.
That's so adorable.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really lovely. What comes up for me around that is like, I wonder if, besides like feeling that she was learning and cared for, which is all very lovely, I guess this is like a question about her and a comment about me, but like, is there regret for her, do you think? Or do you feel like anybody's had regret of like, I wish I knew these things earlier? I wish that I had seen the system and the lies sooner, because I would have either lived differently, felt differently. Because I think for me, like, and came, I think, out of 2020 and actually probably 2016 election, thinking about the ways in which like all of my public school upbringing and especially history classes were like so skewed and such lies and all the things that, like, and you talk about this, right? Like, oh, we're like a post-racial society and all of this is and it's like, it's all bullshit. But like, that feels very distinctly like fourth grade or whatever.
Yeah. I didn't hear it specifically from my parents, and I do think they're the type of people that if they did have those feelings, they would never confess them, right? But I have heard it countless times, just not even specifically just from this book, but anytime I've like gathered people together to talk about, hey, let's read this book about Asian American history, or, people just learning more, that feeling of like anger comes up a lot, actually. Like, I wish I had known this sooner. Like, I'm upset, right? Like, and so I think it's really common when people say that to me. I really try to not shame them for it, because it's like, you can't blame yourself for not knowing something you didn't know, especially in a system that's actively trying to hide this from you. And so I think, at least for Asian Americans, I think it's really normal to feel those feelings. But at the same time, I'm like, don't get stuck too much in your own shame, your self-personal shame, because what I really want us to do is direct all that energy towards the system. Because I think we are conditioned to be like, oh my gosh, I've done wrong, or I had it wrong. Now I'm a bad person. It's my fault. Oh gosh, I got to do, and I'm like, no, that's not the point, right? That's what they would like us to do, right? Because then it keeps us stuck. But like, it's like the whole point is like, feel the anger. This is like a just anger that you have, but we have to direct it to the proper source, which is a system of white supremacy. So like, let's like take a look at what the system of white supremacy is and channel that anger to doing things that are actually going to dismantle the system as a whole, and spend less time in our own personal shame. Because as Asian Americans, I think we spend too much time there anyway, right? We spend enough time there already.
That is true. That is fair. How do we do that, Ellie? What's the steps forward?
So the last section of the book kind of talks about, it's called Dismantling the System. So my methodology, as someone who identifies as an introvert, who is just kind of like this suburban mom, meaning it's not that I've never been a part of a protest or a march, but it's not my number one go-to, right?
Yeah,
and
fair.
The schedule of taking care of my family, it's not, these are not necessarily ready options for me, right? If I'm also caring for others.
That was certainly a moment I had in 2020 where I was like, I would like to go to this protest. I also have to go pick up from daycare. So
right. I can't leave my child crying because, right? Yeah. So my strategy or my philosophy is I talk a lot about like, how do we undermine the system? And so in that section, we kind of talk about 3 prongs, I guess, of a solution. So the first one is divesting from whiteness. The second one is unlearning anti-Blackness and kind of drawing ourselves closer to Blackness and working in solidarity with other communities of color. And the third one is like unlearning self-hate and embracing self-love. And so like there are 3 prongs, but I think they're all actually pretty important. Usually people, depending where they are in their personal journey, will be like, oh, this one's the most important one. And I'm like, well, I think that says more about you. But if you think that's the most important one, go for it. Like, go for that one that is most important to you, right? But I think those 3 in tandem are actually all pretty important. And it's more about in the ways that Asian Americans live our lives daily and the ways we think about the space that we inhabit within the racialized system of the United States. Like, how do we change that? Because like my hypothesis is that we're kind of in the middle of this racial hierarchy and we are stereotyped as the model minority. And it's like, they love to tell the story about us. It was like, everyone can move their way up this ladder of success. Look at the Asians. Look how they're hardworking and submissive, and they just work so hard and they're so nice. If everybody's just more like that, and even if Asian Americans do that more, like, it'll solve racism, which we all know is not the solution at all, right? But I think
what do you mean being a model minority is not the solution, Ellie? Why did I work so hard at my magnet high school to get not a 4.0, unfortunately, if that was not the solution? What?
Right. So it's like they're telling us this is a solution, right? But we're like, clearly we know that it's not. And so it's like, but I do think we play a vital role in our positioning. So I'm kind of like, well, it seems clear that they need us to play this role to make it seem like this like meritocracy works, right? So if we stop telling that story with our lives, right? And we kind of just, we were like, no, we're not doing that anymore. Like, I was like, well, the middle is also very powerful because we can just kind of like let the middle just like bottom out, right? Like, you know? So I was just like, well, I'm like, I don't know if it's going to work, but I don't think we've done it yet. So we might as well try and see what happens. And in the meantime, if we're learning to love ourselves more, we're learning to respect and work with other communities of color more with more integrity, right? If we're learning to not put whiteness on a pedestal and think whiteness is superior than everything, like, those are all really good things. Yeah, so like the last section of the book, I really try to walk people through very like tangible steps that they can take even like right away. Like starting from where they are in their life, just to start poking holes in the way we allow the system to operate in our lives and free us. Get free of it. Yeah.
Oh man, I love that. How do we do it through food?
Oh man.
No, I'm just.
Right. I mean, right. It's like all those discussions about like, I'm ashamed of my food, my smelly food. I think some people are starting already. It's like, I'm not ashamed of my food. It's delicious.
Yeah. I mean, not to like make our center our work in this, but like I think that's kind of why we started this of like, don't be ashamed of your food. Tell your stories.
Yeah.
Tell the stories that are like uniquely yours and also in some ways, you know, universal or at least Asian universal.
Yeah.
And also fuck the like reaching for whiteness, white proxy.
Yeah.
Drives me crazy.
I have this story. So I remember it was like during the pandemic. And so my mom was like, oh, this goes back to the chicken broth. And so my mom, it was like, finally we could like, finally we could interact because like for a whole year, we didn't see my parents, right? They were in their house. We were in our house. And my mom was like, can I bring you guys some chicken soup? And we're like, yes, Ama's chicken soup. And my mom at the time was really into like Dr. Oz. And she comes over and she didn't bring her normal chicken soup, her chicken broth that we were all like excited about. She had given us like some like American recipe through Dr. Oz that was supposed to be like some healthy version of chicken, like chicken soup, like American chicken soup. And I was so pissed. I was like, what is happening to like she's like listening about like how this is better, right? It's like then like this like chicken broth that comes from her and our culture and like the healing properties and how it's, and then she's learning that whatever this like random recipe that Dr. Oz put online is quote unquote better. But I'm like, I feel like I grew up with so much of that mentality, right? It's like you doubt yourself because it's like, what is getting attention? What is getting praise? What's getting, money or paid? It's like, are those things better than what we have? And a lot of it is learning. It's like, oh no, like what we have is like way better. They're jealous is what they are. They're jealous of it.
Well, sorry, this just like weird capitalist thing happened in my head where I was like, if this is we're a pretty new country, relatively speaking, right? So everything is sort of like hodgepodge brought from somewhere. But if you're like competing with thousands of years of traditional Chinese medicine, these medicinal herbs and soups versus what you can sell from a grocery store, then like, or, talk people into thinking it's better. Like capitalism relies on us being like, oh, I guess it's not the traditional one.
Right. Yeah. It's just, it amazes me even in my own life, or even when I was young, where it was like, ew, the Asian stuff is gross, or, oh, that's embarrassing. It's like, I want the American stuff. I want the white stuff. It's better. And then now as an adult, like having come out of a lot of that, and I'm like, what was I thinking? like, oh my gosh. It's like, thank God I got over that, right? But then sometimes I'm like, oh, my poor mom. Like, I think growing up, she heard a lot from us kids about like, ew, that's gross, or ew, no, or, so,
Yeah.
Sorry, mom.
Sorry, but also not going to shame yourself. We're not spending a lot of time there.
Yes.
Yeah. Which I think is like a hard thing in a lot of ways, right? Like, I don't know, we can cut this. This is maybe too something. But I think part of what is hard for people to like acknowledge and then move on is that means they have to like acknowledge that they did something quote unquote wrong.
Yeah.
Or like, they felt the wrong way or they thought the wrong thing or they know that it's wrong now, but because that feels hard because then there's an amount of shame that they feel about themselves, they just double down.
Yeah.
So they don't have to feel it.
Right. They don't have to feel it. And then I do think, at least like in my family, I think a lot of Asian cultures, we don't know how to talk about our feelings to each other. Or like there aren't those, like in Western like therapy, like there are these scripts of like, I apologize for this. And then you say this and you're like, oh, I hear you. And it's like, those scripts don't really work or exist with within a lot of communities. I've tried to do them with my own family and I'm like, oh, that backfired. It didn't work. They were supposed to say this and they didn't say that. And now I'm just heated and I'm upset too.
Yeah.
And so I think even just like, I have friends that are therapists that are exploring these like more communal ways of therapy where it's like, it doesn't require older generations that have lived through so much trauma and maybe don't want to revisit the hard things. But like, how do we get together and still like heal some of those relationships? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to happen in these scripted ways. But I always I still struggle being American born, having grown up in the US. Like, sometimes I think about all the sitcom families I grew up watching. It's like, I know my family's not like that and I love my family, but sometimes I still wish it could be that easy. Maybe it's the ease that I wish for, not so much like the whiteness, but it's like, it just seems so easy. But also it's just TV. It's not real.
It's not real.
It's not real.
Right? So, yeah.
How did you get your mom back to doing her non-Dr. Oz chicken broth?
Oh, I just told her. I think I texted her. I was like, Mom, what is this? She's like, I'm like, no, that's not what we want. But I think it helped her I don't know because it's not like she said it outright, but I do think it made her feel more empowered. She's like, oh, you guys do want like what I have to offer. You don't want this white version of like whatever. Like, there is value in it. So
positive reinforcement.
Yes, exactly. So I think it really did help her. And so it's like, even now, this like the time I told you guys with my book launch, her bringing over this souped up version of her chicken broth with the abalone and everything. It's like, I think she was like, okay, we're going all in with this. And I was like, yeah, Mom.
Nice.
That's awesome. I'm glad. No more Dr. Oz.
Yeah, absolutely not.
In any way. Ellie, this has been super fun. I want to have like a whole separate conversation with you that is just about the book. And maybe we will in some other format.
Yeah.
But for now, this has been such a delight. I know that we don't have a recipe for anything. Listeners will figure that out. Or maybe you just go on the TikTok and find the one that looks good to you.
I have a list of ingredients I can give you.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't tell you how much of anything.
That's fine. You know what? That's a great starting point. And then we too will let it simmer, go away, scurry back to our stove,
Yes.
taste and figure it out. Maybe, Sam, maybe that's our thing. We just need to start aging into Asian parents quicker. Like, just start becoming everybody's Asian parents now so that we'll be better at cooking.
Yeah, you do that.
I don't know. Does it work that way?
I think it works that way. You give it a try, though.
I mean, I've started this, drink hot water, and I don't like my desserts too sweet thing. So I feel like I'm already on the path. I just need to speed it up a little bit.
Level.
Next level.
I'm drinking hot water too. Yeah, that's my go-to beverage is the hot water.
Do you feel like you aged into that as like you hit some level of mom and you're like, my beverage is hot water now?
Well, my body won't let me have coffee or like I've always been really sensitive to caffeine. So the caffeine was always a hard thing. But like I would drink decaf, but I have like really bad acid reflux that I have to manage. So it's like the coffee and the tea. And I'm like, what's really great? Hot water.
Yeah.
It's so great.
We're going to start some sort of club. Hot water moms. We'll get jackets. Oh man, Ellie, this is super fun. Sam designed these. They're going to be so good. All right.
We can have mugs.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course. Mugs. Oh, God, it's so good. Like a tumbler for your hot water on the go.
Yes.
Because home hot water is better than
True.
out.
Yes.
Well, and you can't put hot water in a coffee mug because then it tastes like coffee.
Yeah.
From residual.
Yeah.
Okay, I have lost the plot on this entirely. I'm so sorry, everyone. If you're still listening, if you're still here, I understand if you're not. Ellie, where can people find your work, find you online, find the book?
I have a website, which is ellieyangcamp.com, which has links to where you can find me everywhere else. But I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is EYC, which is 3 E's, the word Y, W-H-Y, and the word C, S-E-E, EYC, on Instagram. And then I also have a newsletter on Substack, which I think is Ellie Yang Camp. I think that's the handle. Or EYC. If you look at both, I don't know.
Amazing. Also,
we'll have links.
We'll have links. I really love that you spell out the EYC. Like when I saw that, I was like, this is excellent.
Well, actually, I mean, I started it when I was still trying to keep a pretty low profile because I'm like, I'm going to be posting about race and I don't really want to be easy to find.
Yeah, fair.
And I didn't know I was going to have to market a book.
Also
so I'm
fair.
Like, it's too late to turn back now. So,
Well, either way, it's very good. I enjoy it immensely. Listeners, you can find us worstqualitycrab.com, on Instagram at worstqualitycrab, or email us worstqualitycrabpod@gmail.com. We will get up some version of some recipe. In addition to that, I would say just, go out and find yourself a good bowl of Taiwanese beef noodle soup. Put a whole chicken in a big pot of water. Add what feels right to you. Follow your spirit and have chicken broth. I think we should do that, Sam. We haven't had a chicken broth in a while. And then eat the meat after. Thighs. Always thighs.
it's the perfect weather now, too.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's nice and cool.
Ellie, thank you again so much for being here. We would love to have you back anytime. The listeners become readers of the book. It is really good, especially, I think, the intersection of race and being Asian American. It's a tricky one. I mean, it's tricky no matter who you are, but I've really enjoyed it so far. And again, it puts a lot of things into words that I could feel but could never articulate. And Ellie, I just want to thank you for that. And, I look forward to how this book, I think, will impact our lives and having you back sometime. So thank you again.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Everybody, will talk to you later. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.